Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Sreeram Potukuchi with Republic Services. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Seth Rao, who is the CEO of FirstEigen. So, I wanted to ask you about data governance. You mentioned data governance and the process being important, and quality is an outcome of a good or a bad process, right? So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about, um, how can organizations think about data governance in terms of producing better outcomes, and data quality is a byproduct of a good or a bad governance, right? Upstream.
Yeah. Yeah. So how should companies think about governance, broadly speaking, right?
Right.
So um, governance right now has been, so governance is a very broad term. It
Mhm.
refers to data privacy,
Right.
data, security, and the quality or the trustability of data, and a few other things. So I'm going to focus only on the usability, quality, and the trustability of data side of the governance.
And the risk.
So
And that
and the
risk.
risk as well, right? So
Yeah.
good quality, again, risk is, loss of privacy could be a risk, loss of
Sure.
security could be a risk, bad data itself is a risk. So I'll combine all of that. So to Sriram, your question is, what should governance teams do to have good governance programs in place, right?
Yep.
Um, so just from a quality and trustability standpoint,
Mhm.
the current governance approach is absolutely unscalable
Mhm.
to ensure the data is trustable. Very laborious.
Mhm.
They have to start looking to the next generation tools. AI and ML have simplified life enormously. What DataWalk has done is it has taken this laborious process where people have to look at the data, figure out what are the rules that they need to put in to validate the data. DataWalk has taken that process, and what would take 4 to 8 weeks per table, it does it in like less than an hour by using AI ML and automating that process.
Mhm.
AI ML has brought in unprecedented capabilities of computational horsepower to do things which we as humans will take a long time to do.
Mhm.
So the data governance teams are still quite backward in their thinking and saying everything has to be done laboriously.
Mhm.
Instead, they have to look at anti-fragile ways
Mhm.
of data governance. The current data governance process is very fragile. So I'm using the term from Nassim Taleb's Black Swan, right? It has to be anti-fragile.
Mhm.
Data is chaotic. Data is often random. If your
Mhm.
processes break due to randomness, you have a bad process.
Mhm.
It is not robust. It's not anti-fragile. So they have to look for tools that are built to be anti-fragile, that grow with randomness in the data, that become better due to randomness in data.
Mhm.
So data governance team have to look beyond old ways of doing things and look at more anti-fragile tools
Mhm.
that have adopted AI ML
Yep.
and that can withstand the randomness in data and still protect the company from making bad decisions.
Mhm.
It's a fundamental change in paradigm, and that'll also have to follow with cultural changes within the organization as well.
Okay. Good. Thank you. And as a follow-up question to that, what does like what does success look like for data governance programs, well-run data governance programs over long term?
So I want to go back to the concept of the dark data. So
Mm.
what we've seen is even among financial services company and some of the largest banks, 90% of the data is dark data, which is very scary, right?
Yeah.
If that's for banks, how does it look for
Other
people who are
organizations.
less, who are less obviously data dependent?
Right.
So the success is not looking for a nuclear meltdown to say, I've not had a meltdown, therefore I'm successful. That's too late. The success is the control of the process. So therefore, the success is if we right now have 90% dark data, the boards should monitor what is the percentage decrease in your dark data quarter over quarter or month over month. You cannot be at 90% and hope that everything in the end will work out okay, because that data that you're not monitoring is used by finance, by marketing, by sales, by operations, and everybody.
Right.
We get annual health checks. Now, how often does the data get a health check? Forget about annual. They don't even have a decades check, right? It's ridiculous. So success is starting to acknowledge the fact that everybody pays lip service to saying, yeah, data is the new oil, data is the new gold. Yeah, but treat it like one. It is valuable. So make sure you monitor it, make sure it is trustable, make sure it is usable. So reduce the dark data from 90% to less than 10%. At that point, I would say you're doing pretty good. So it's tracking the amount of dark data, which should be the focus.
Okay, thank you. What do you think, a follow-up question to that, sorry, the light bulbs are going off in my head, but what do you think are, in your experience, are like major roadblocks for any organization to, one, effectively manage the risk in data, and also, more importantly, having a good, trustworthy, to your point, decrease the dark data and all that, have a trustworthy, good quality data set for the organization? What are like the top 3 roadblocks that you routinely see?
So the biggest one is organization culture. So the old way of trying to manage data is too deep. Everything is manual, which is just not scalable. Okay? People have to embrace AI ML enabled software like DataWalk. And I think with the growth of ChatGPT and other generative AI in the last literally 4 months, AI ML has become more acceptable. I'm hoping the organizations will change more rapidly. In the past, they were still very adherent to the manual ways of doing things. So the biggest roadblock is people thinking that only people can validate the accuracy of data. Only people know what is right and what is wrong, right? That is not truly the case. We have limitations. There's only so many things that we can remember, only so many rules that we can figure out. The AI, ML, and computers have gone far, far beyond what we are capable of. And they can take some of the mundane tasks and they can automate it. Sort of lean on them, let them do the mundane. And the humans can do something a lot more specialized, in order to validate the data, for example, which is very use case specific, use case specific, organization specific. There could be unique rules that need to be put in to validate it, and humans would know that. The AI ML would not be able to know every last atom of data validation check that needs to be put in, but it will definitely do a very good job in figuring out broadly what is trustable and not trustable data. So organizational thinking must change. And that's the biggest roadblock right now, the way we see it.
Okay. What should, in your view, like an organization that's just getting started, right? And an organization, they know that, to your point, 80 to 90% of their data is dark. What are some of the things that you would advise them to do if they're just getting started and they want to establish trust in their data and all that? Tools and technology apart, what would you advise them to do? First 2 or 3 things they should do immediately, I guess.
Great point. I think this is a common knowledge where if you spend $1 in catching an error upstream, you would have saved $100 if that error had gone to the endpoint, propagated into multiple systems. You catch it at that point. So the cost is literally 1:100. So organizations that are starting have two choices. They could start at the endpoint, where just before you're consuming your data, you're constantly monitoring the trustability of data. Or you could start upstream, maybe the data lake. As soon as the data comes within your organization, you start monitoring it. You can catch the errors and you will minimize what's happening downstream. So depending on the criticality of what decisions are being made, one of these two paths can be taken. If it's a long-term program, you start at the lake. If you want immediate results, you start closer to the endpoint. In either way, the key thing is putting data trust monitors throughout your pipeline. Now, where you start is the question, but throughout the pipeline, you have to put data trust monitors. These are autonomous data trust sensors. They will give you the data trust score for every table, any point in time that table or file goes through that point in the pipeline. So that has to be the first action companies have to take. Start with data trust monitors.
Okay, thank you. Well, another follow-up question to that is, how should organizations prioritize, right? I mean, do you start with the high impact, critical, or do you start with something that's simple enough where they can get in, get their feet wet, fine-tune the process before they move to a more complex, more critical? Or would you advise organizations to start with the most critical because that's where most of the impact is?
Yeah. So it's actually most companies or people responsible doing that don't have the luxury of making that pick, right?
Right.
They can't say, no, I'm going to go with something super easy with low business impact.
Right.
They probably will be looking for other opportunities very soon.
Right.
So it is a very specific question. Fortunately, what we have seen is that the status of data is so far, is so bad, it's so poor, that you could literally start anywhere and you'll have an immediate impact. And there are actually a lot of very easy turnkey opportunities within companies that will have a dramatic impact.
Right.
Over time, you could get to the more complex problems. One of our Fortune 100 customers, just by replacing their data monitoring with DataWalk, were able to reduce their error rates by 25% and more, 25-50%. And they were able to redeploy the people that they were using in the data quality program to other areas. So they were able to reduce the cost and reduce the error as well. Straightforward stuff. Once you get that base, people get the management buy-in and they can start expanding to more and more stuff. But there are incredibly lot of opportunities, very easy for the plugging. Step in, throw it anywhere you want, you'll have a serious advantage.
With that, thank you so much, Seth Rao, for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.